Hello, hello, Liberation Hour. This is your host, Comrade Felicity, coming at you, pre-recorded. Yes, folks, today, look at me mincing my words already. Tonight, I am not going to be covering the news as I usually do, even when it's a pre-recorded segment. I'm going through a lot of changes in my life right now. All good things, all good things. I'm just very tired and busy. So, tonight, for those who are listening to this episode live. It will be a shorter show. However, the full segment, as usual, will be posted to my YouTube channel at Communist Bananas or Comrade Felicity. With that said, we will be back to our regular scheduled programming next week. I appreciate everyone's patience as as the show progresses, and I would there's a lot that I really want to comment on this week. However, I am just so freaking busy and, so much to do, so little time. So I will see you all next week and for our regular scheduled programming as per usual. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend. And let's hope that there are no more threats to humanity on Twitter until then. So I will see you all, or I will talk at you all next week, and bye. Welcome back for, I want to say, the 39th episode of the Liberation Hour. I have a very special guest here today to discuss all things colonization in the modern day. We have a lot to cover, and so I'm not going to take a super long intro, but if you want to introduce yourself, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for today's discussion. My name is Stefan. I am based in Sweden, but originally from Canada. I moved here in 2018. I have a background, a BA in Peace and Conflict Studies and an MA in Middle Eastern Studies. I focus on cultural analysis from a Marxist perspective. And today, I'm excited to talk about the colonial gaze and the algorithmic age, as well as what ethical political engagement looks like in the contemporary era, given the current state of the world.
Yes, the state of the world is currently not great. But we're going to fix that. It's going to be okay. I keep revolutionary optimism, and I know that you have a lot of
Love it.
notes and things to cover. So I'm going to let you start us off with a quick background because I know you do. This does require a lot of background knowledge. So I think the way we're going to kind of break this up is like the first 30 minutes of this is going to be a background, like how does the beginnings of colonization, all of the things that you want to cover related to that. I mean, you are an expert, so very excited to hear what you have to say. And then the last 30 to 45 minutes will be a more contemporary discussion and question and answer. I think that it's going to be very fruitful conversation. This feels like I'm back in anthropology class, so I'm so excited. Professor Dr. Jade Netwick, if you're listening, you'd be proud. So yeah,
Well, I
let's
mean,
get
I
started.
I have to say thank you for calling me an expert. I would never refer to myself as an expert on anything, right? I'm very passionate about this subject, but I'm always learning
Yes, of
myself, right?
course. We're all students.
Yeah, perfect,
We're all
perfect.
students of the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism. So,
Love it. Exactly.
so yeah, let's get started. A quick beginning, a quick refresher for those of us who haven't been in anthropology in a while.
Perfect. So, I mean, I guess maybe a good way to start this is I'd like to set the stage for an experience that is probably familiar to almost anyone who regularly uses social media. Let's say we wake up in the morning, we open our phones, and we begin scrolling through the feed.
Ah,
Within a
yes.
few minutes, you might see a friend's vacation photo, a meme, perhaps an advertisement, definitely an advertisement,
Yes.
and then suddenly an image of war appears, a bombed building, a wounded child, a body being carried through the rubble. A lot
Or
of us
being,
are
yeah.
definitely thinking, yes, exactly. A lot of us
Yeah.
are thinking Gaza at the moment, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost immediately, the feed continues, a joke, a recipe video, a dance trend, another image of destruction. What is striking about this rhythm is how ordinary it has become. The suffering of distant others now appears intermittently within a stream of entertainment, social interaction, and advertising woven seamlessly into the everyday infrastructure of digital life. Here, it is tempting to interpret this phenomenon, right, as something entirely new, a byproduct of smartphones, social media platforms, and algorithmic feeds that were never quite designed to handle the moral weight of global tragedy. But today, I want to suggest something slightly different, that what we are witnessing may not simply be a technological glitch or an unintended side effect of digital platforms. Instead, it may be a continuation of a much older historical structure, what we might call a colonial way of looking at the world. So essentially, my argument here is that the constant circulation of graphic images of suffering on social media reproduces elements of what I like to refer to as colonial visual economies, systems in which certain bodies are made visible primarily as objects of spectacle, extraction, and consumption. And if we want to understand how this system operates today, we need to take a step back for a moment and think more carefully about the politics of looking itself. When you scroll through your feed and encounter this mixture of entertainment, personal updates, global tragedy, do you ever notice how abruptly those different emotional registers collide, or has it been something that almost feels normal to you?
Yeah, no, I think that was such a good introduction. Yeah, I think,
Thanks.
gosh, I mean, that is such a great framework to start off with. Because yeah, I mean, so I'm actually in a class currently, shout out Dr. Fields,
Hmm.
called Visual Politics. So I feel
Oh,
like
very
we're
nice.
we're so prepared for this already. Yeah, I think especially on the feed, like I think when the genocide in Gaza started, I mean, I was certainly still seeing stuff that was happening in the world, but it became so much clearer.
Mm-mm.
And um, there's definitely like, I don't know. I would say that like my experience with scrolling and like seeing these images of war and destruction and then seeing a meme and then seeing a cooking video and then seeing another image of war and destruction, it like it'll never become normal in my brain, but it almost feels like it's just going along. It just feels like part of the algorithm. It doesn't feel like I did you know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean. Yes,
yeah,
and you're headed in the right direction currently,
yeah,
right? And maybe you've encountered this in your class, right, or talked about this, right? Because one of the central insights of visual culture scholarship is that seeing is never a neutral act. The
no,
cultural theorist Nicholas Mirtsov develops this argument in his book, The Right to Look, A Counterhistory of Visuality, where he suggests that modern systems of power, from colonial empires to contemporary states, have relied heavily on what he calls visuality, structured ways that structured ways of seeing that reinforce authority. Visuality determines who essentially has the right to look, who must be looked at, and how the images that circulate in society are interpreted. Because under colonialism, this system of visuality became an extraordinary, powerful instrument for domination. European powers produced vast archives of photographs, drawings, ethnographic exhibitions, and anthropological studies depicting colonized populations. These images were often presented as a neutral documentation, as science, curiosity, or cultural education, but they also performed a deeper political function. They taught audiences in the imperial metropole how to see colonized people. And what those audiences were trained to see were not complex political subjects, but rather types, specimens, or spectacles. The, histor- the historian Pascal Blanchard, I believe, documents this dynamic vividly in his book Human Zoos: The Invention of the
mhm,
Savage, which describes the enormously popular exhibitions held across Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries, where people from colonized regions were displayed in staged native villages. Millions of visitors attended these exhibitions, but their purpose was not simply entertainment. They functioned pedagogically. They trained European audiences to perceive colonized populations through a framework of hierarchy and distance.
Hmm.
And I know you are a fan of Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon captures the psychological dimension of this gaze in Black Skin, White Masks.
Yeah.
Fanon describes the moments in which he becomes acutely aware that his body is being interpreted through the layers of colonial stereotype. Moments in which he realizes that he is not being perceived as an individual, but rather as a racialized object within someone else's visual field. What Fanon reveals here is that the gaze itself is never innocent. It is structured by relations of power. Colonial spectatorship trained viewers to look at certain populations in ways that made their humanity less visible, less complex, and ultimately easier to dominate. So when you hear these historical examples, what parallels do you see with contemporary media? Or do you think the dynamics of digital visibility operate in fundamentally different ways?
Well, yeah, actually, the first thing that I think of isn't actually something contemporary. It's a see, I forget her name, but there's a woman from Africa back in like the early 20th century, I want to say, or late 19th century, who was stolen when she was like
Mm,
a young woman, I believe. She died very young,
mm,
and she had a different body from the European body because she's not
mm,
white.
mm,
She's literally from like a country or a tribe in Africa. I'm not too familiar where exactly she was from. Um, someone listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. But she was put on, like, she was dressed up and basically like and like completely naked, by the way, just humiliated
mm,
and
mm,
put on a pedestal for people like Europeans to come. She was basically like in a human zoo.
mm, mm,
Um, and sorry, cat, move. Thank you. Um, and she like who? Okay, I need to look this lady up because this is gonna irritate me.
yeah, go
Um,
ahead, take your time.
um,
And I believe in the US, early 20th century, they had like these human zoos and circuses as well, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, no, Sarah Baartman, I believe is
Okay, okay.
her name, and she this was okay, yeah, this was like the early 20th century. This
Mm,
is
mm.
her Wikipedia. But
Oh,
that's this
wow.
but yeah, she was put on
Okay.
literally on display. She was put on display for people to look at. And there's like you can look at the photos or like not the photos but like the drawings or I guess kind of pictures, like whatever visual media they had back then
Mm.
displaying her. I'm sure I can probably find it because yeah, no, look, this is what they had her in. Oh, you can't see it very well, but
It's not focusing.
there we
Oh,
go.
there it is. Okay.
And they had her wearing like, and they didn't return her remains to where she came from until like literally I think like a few years ago. Like it was like this woman was put on display, like literally exactly what you're talking about
Mm,
happened
mm,
to this
mm, mm,
person.
mm, mm,
And like basically like call like the subjects like the people who like lived in like imperial core, like the
mm,
the country that was doing the colonizing, when they saw these images as you were talking about, or like this literal physical person being dressed up and curated for them to like view them as a certain way, like this
mm.
woman is just like a normal person who was just like stolen, like just straight up. Okay, cat, no, no, like just sorry, this is like such a common occurrence.
It's okay. Orange cats, right?
Yes,
That's
orange cat. Yeah, she's an orange girl cat, which is even more rare. And see, look at this. This is ridiculous. Like, but anyway, like
it's
she
okay.
was
Let the cat do its thing. Unless it's bothering you, I'm not bothered by it.
okay.
I
I
think
just
it's
want
kind of adorable, actually.
she just likes to she knows that I'm doing something right now and she's doing this on purpose. It's fine though. But this woman was literally stolen from her land and her family and her entire people, put on display
Mm,
for Europeans, died at a young age, and was still put on display after she was dead. Like she like her entire life was
disgusting.
was literally to be a spectacle for colonizers, to be a literal curated image for these people to view through the lens of how colonization dehumanizes people and takes out that like that that incredibly important element of like the experience of perceiving somebody, seeing their
Exactly.
humanity. And
Exactly.
and she was just like completely exploited for her whole life. I mean,
Mm,
it was disgusting. And when I think about like a current contemporary example of that, I think of like all of the images that come across my feed of people who literally post themselves like in terrible conditions, as a form of like it feels like an arena, putting everybody in arena to like, hopefully you'll get across someone's feed and they'll stop for a second to look at your photo and what's going on. And the more struggle that's involved and the more the more interesting I guess the photo is to look at, the more likely they are to like stop and look at your
mm,
picture and click on your
mm, mm,
profile and maybe donate some money. But it's like it's literally like it's like it's such an exploitative way to perceive people who are from other countries that have been
mm.
colonized and like, pillaged, basically. Do you know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. 100%. And I love that you keep on leading me to my next point like perfectly. I love how you brought it into the more like contemporary era. And by the way, when you were talking about this lady from Africa who was taken and put into one of these human zoos, by the way, as a spectacle, it's funny. Of course, that doesn't happen anymore, not in the same way. But I think when we look at how people from how colonial subjects today are exoticized.
Hmm.
Now it's shifted away almost from becoming like a spectacle at a human zoo into
Yeah.
the exoticization of these bodies, right? For
Right.
example, big butts, big
Yeah.
lips, right? It
Hmm.
suddenly becomes an attractive thing, right? But at the end of the day, we're still not looking at these individuals as people, but
Hmm.
spectacles, but in a different way, totally, right? So now like we could shift from these kind of like historical examples of colonial exhibitions to another visual genre that circulates widely today. And as you said, it's images of suffering, right? Photographs and videos of war, famine, and disaster. These have all long played important roles in shaping global awareness, right? In many cases, such images have exposed atrocities that might otherwise have remained invisible. Now, today, due to the decentralized nature of social media, we are aware of the brutal nature of Zionist settler colonialism, for example. And yet, this also raises a difficult ethical question. The writer Susan Sontag addresses this dilemma in Regarding the Pain of Others, where she asks what happens to viewers who encounter repeated images of violence and suffering over long periods of time. Do such images deepen our sense of empathy and moral responsibility, or do they gradually create emotional distance? Now, Sontag's answer is deliberately ambivalent. Images of suffering can certainly shock us into awareness. They could interrupt complacency and reveal injustices that demand attention. But at the same time, repeated exposure can also transform suffering into something strangely familiar, something we observe from afar, rather than something that compels us to act. A related argument appears in the work of Judith Butler, particularly in her book Frames of War, When is Life Grievable? Butler suggests that media systems implicitly determine which lives are recognized as worthy of mourning. Some deaths appear as global tragedies that demand collective grief and political response, while others circulate almost routinely, appearing as brief images that barely interrupt that flow of information. What this reveals is a hierarchy of human value. Some lives are framed as fully human and deeply grievable, while others appear in ways that make their loss seem almost expected, as if these sort of atrocities belong in the global south, in these colonies, right? And I was wondering if you yourself could think of any examples of how this asymmetry appears in the media, where some tragedies dominate global attention, while others seem to pass almost unnoticed.
Yeah, actually, strangely, this reminds me of, do you remember when that submersible like blew up next to the Titanic?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay, I have 2 points that I want to hit. I have 2 points that I want to hit real fast.
Yeah,
So,
tell me.
my first one is the submersible versus the boat of immigrants who were like, there were like 600 people on this boat and they all drowned. Like, what,
Mm,
like 15 people
mm,
survived, I think.
mm.
Yeah, it was not, it was a tragedy. But for a week, all you could see online, on the news, anywhere you looked was about this stupid submersible and this billionaire. And I watched an entire video breaking down what happened and that led up to that point of that submersible imploding. It
Mm, mm,
literally
mm.
imploded like 4 days. Like no, it imploded like not 4 days. Like immediately.
Yeah.
It imploded like 8 hours after they went underwater. Like,
Mm,
and
mm.
it was literally controlled by like a Game Boy or something. Like it was it was so like such a terrible piece of technology. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, you have this boat of migrants who are like
Mm,
desperately trying to get like anywhere else than where they were. Like why
mm,
would 600 people pile in a boat if it was not serious?
mm.
Like let's
One is treated as a tragedy in the case of the billionaires imploding in that submersible, which anyway.
mhm,
And while the other is treated as a problem to be
yeah.
solved,
And it's
right?
yeah,
Mm,
exactly. And it's like
mm,
600 people just died. Like 600 people, and I'm not saying that the lives of the people in the submersible, it's not sad as well for the families and the people who lost somebody. But it's like 600 other people just died and we can't give them even a lick of attention.
mm,
We
mm,
can't
mm.
even like Zuko. We can't even he's loud. We can't even
I didn't hear him.
okay, awesome, because I can, and I'm so paranoid that people can hear him. Like, but it's like it was crazy to me because the only way that you really knew about what happened to those migrants, those human beings who tragically, and there was children, like young kids on that boat, by the way. It
Mm,
wasn't
mm,
like I feel like especially I heard this when I was a waitress for like 4 months before I came to Illinois. I remember I was working with these like teenagers and and just random people at work who were talking about what was going on in Gaza, and they were like, well, it's sad what's going on with the kids. I'm just sad about the kids. And I'm like,
mm,
why can't we be sad about everyone? Like, I don't understand, like, what? And they're like, well, the women and the children. And I'm like, there's just random guys there as well who are also like, not every like adult male is going to join Hamas. And even if it was
mm,
Hamas, like, it's still sad that these people are going through this. And it's like, I'm sorry, but Hamas has every right to be resisting right now. So, but like, if we're just going to talk about what they were like saying about it's, oh, I'm only sad about the children. And it's like, I'm sorry, children are not the only human beings that are alive in the
mm,
Gaza Strip.
mm, mm,
Like it's incredibly sad what is happening to children, but it's also incredibly sad what's happening to the elderly and mothers and fathers and uncles and brothers and sisters and
mm.
cousins and daughters and sons. Like there's everybody is somebody to somebody.
A hundred
You know?
percent, 100%. And you brought up an interesting point about, how there were children on these migrant boats as well. And that brings me back to like how these images, although emotionally heavy, are turned more or less, to spectacles than anything else. If you remember during the Syrian civil war, that image of the boy in a life jacket washed up on the beach,
I was like
a little
10 when the
child.
Syria like
Ah,
when
okay.
was the Syrian civil war happening? I'm sorry. I'm bad with
It started in
dates.
2011.
Okay, yes, I
Yeah,
was 8 years old.
but ended
So
in like 2021. So
okay,
it lasted for about,
I was a
yeah.
teenager then. So
Mm.
I'm familiar. I let me look up this image real fast so I know what you're talking
Sure,
about.
sure, sure,
Um,
sure. The point is here that often these images are just completely devoid of context,
right.
right? You just see the images of suffering, the
Oh,
the death. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the one.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody cried for a little bit, went, oh, and then, that was it. Nobody knew. Nobody could tell you their name. I can't even tell you their name. And therein lies the issue, right? And I think what distinguishes the present moment is not simply that images of suffering circulate, but rather the infrastructure through which they circulate. Social media platforms are designed around the logic of engagement. Their algorithms are built to keep us users scrolling, reacting, sharing, and remaining on the platform for as long as possible. And within this system, emotionally intense content, such as that image of the child, tends to perform exceptionally well. Shocking images capture attention quickly. They generate comments, reactions, and shares. They trigger the emotional responses that keep the algorithmic machine running. The result is that suffering becomes highly visible within algorithmic feeds, not necessarily because platforms intend to highlight injustice, but because intensity drives engagement. So, scholars such as Safia Noble demonstrate in their book, I believe it's called Algorithms of Oppression, that digital systems frequently reproduce existing racial and social hierarchies rather than eliminating them. Algorithms are often described as neutral technological tools. In practice, however, they tend to amplify the biases that already exist within society. Social media platforms, therefore, do not simply distribute images, they organize visibility according to economic and algorithmic incentives. And those incentives reward the most shocking and emotionally disruptive forms of content. Do you think that algorithms primarily shape what we care about, or do they simply shape what we see most often?
Yeah, I would say, and I also, for those listening, answer in the comments what you think about that question, because I would like to hear other people's perspectives on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I don't know. I would have to ponder on that a lot more, maybe write a couple papers on it. I don't know. I feel like it, I feel like it could be one or the other, but I don't, it's such an interesting question because you can see arguments for both. You can see, as a materialist, I am someone who I'm very I have a obviously my worldview is grounded in dialectical materialism and understanding that everything has like a relationship, and things are constantly in motion and changing, and you know I feel like when it's the relationship between what we are seeing and what we are feeling, and whether an algorithm is necessarily like tied to what we are actually like believe in versus what it isn't. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot there, or what we I guess what we don't believe in. Like I think that algorithms can certainly like what they show us can really mold and shape our beliefs. But I also think that humans and people have the capacity to think beyond what is necessarily right in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with context, and the ability to think outside the box and or look for more information to shape our own worldview. Not that everybody does that, but that people can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's only algorithms that shape how we think, but I think that they can really contribute to it, especially for example, like our language. Like for example, I've been using like how like the looks maxing community, like they put maxing at the end of things, like gesture
Yeah.
maxing. I use that
Mm.
language all the time now. It's terrible because
Mm.
I've just been seeing images and videos of like this meme and this like this concept, and or like the different clavicular shit, which is I'm so mad that I know who this is. Like
I
I
don't
don't.
know who that is yet. I've
Okay,
been
don't
seeing kind of
look them up. Don't look them up.
because I've been seeing reels of them and I can't tell if they're based or what the hell is going
No,
on because okay.
no, no. Clavicular is a
I feel like I'm
Nazi.
getting too old. Okay, okay, cool. I feel like I'm getting really old.
Yeah,
Uh,
quick crash course. Clavicular is part of the incel community. He is 21.
Ah,
He's 20 years old. He's literally younger than me, which feels crazy because he looks 25.
mm,
He's probably gonna die in like 3 years from the amount of meth that he does. But yeah, he has been making the rounds on social media because he's part of like the incel group. He's like one of the like the newest starlets within that like that whole sphere, like the manosphere, basically
mm,
as a whole. And I've been seeing so many, like the Adam Friedland show did like an interview with him, and that was pretty interesting. It was funny. And yeah, but I think that I also wanted to touch on a historical example of the ways in which are, because I feel like before algorithms and before apps and the internet and everything, I mean, people had like the newspaper,
mm,
they
mm,
had cable news, and they had
mm,
like three channels. And so that greatly shaped the way people thought about things.
mm, mm.
But I'm going to invoke Dr. Fields here real fast. This is an image that we looked at in class. It's the napalm girl.
Ah, yes, yes. I was just thinking the same thing. This is
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Oh
Thank
my
you,
God, we're
Dr.
so
Fields.
connected. Dr. Fields, yes. Dr. Victoria
Okay.
Fields.
Thank
My
you.
goat, my goat.
Mm.
Yes, she's a communications professor at the University of Illinois, and she's wonderful.
Sure.
But we talked about this image in class, and I think, that image so greatly changed people's perspective on the Vietnam War. That and a lot of other things, of course. But when you think about the ways that, if you think about from like, I want to say like World War II era to now, people's trust in the government has just like been backsliding.
Mm,
And I
mm,
feel
mm,
like there's different points that we can really measure this. For example, the assassination of JFK is like a big
mm,
one.
mm,
People speculation and theorizing about what happened and the really fishy evidence and all of the things that, I personally think that the CIA killed JFK, but that's for another day. And, people really started to lose faith in in the fact that they think the government's lying to them. And before that, there's like the Korean War and the fact that like people were way more on board with the Korean War because of things like the Red Scare and McCarthyism.
mm, mm,
Um,
mm,
but we can also see how people's like trust began to slip even then, with like, I think that there's a double-edged sword with having like a societal demon that everybody's supposed to be afraid of because,
mm,
back then it was communism and the Reds and the Soviet Union. And so you have it creates I feel like a culture of like you're a communist. No, you're a communist. No, you're a
mm,
communist. Of
mm,
like
mm,
being like that Spider-Man meme where they're both pointing at each other, and it's like, no, you like, it creates this culture of like, you're constantly looking over your shoulder and paranoid and being like, who's the bad guy? Who's the bad guy?
mm, mm.
Um, but then people started to slowly realize, oh, the government's kind of the bad guy.
Yes.
Like I feel like we can really see how these things, like for example, like the cultural shift in like the 70s and 80s with rock, specifically like, white boys, being leftists in the 80s, like,
Mm,
and
mm,
being
mm,
part of like that rock and punk scene, like being like counterculture and stuff. And that
mm,
stems from people's disillusionment with the government,
mm,
and that comes from other cultural or other historical events like the Vietnam War and everything. That's a big one.
mm, mm,
And the
mm, mm,
napalm girl, like photos like that change people's perspective because that is such a raw look at what we were doing.
mm,
When you
mm,
do
mm.
like real compositional analysis and real analysis on what was happening, like anyone can see that that's a child that is completely naked and is burning, and is in pain. Like, and I feel like when
Mm.
you were talking about that little Syrian boy that was washed up on the beach, it's a similar thing where people were shocked and upset. And it's like, how could this happen? Like, how could we allow this to happen? A child is suffering or is dead.
Mm,
Like
mm, mm,
it's this, collective grief. But then I think that what's different nowadays is that we see so much of that, that it's constantly in front of us. I feel like back then it was a slow trickle. You didn't necessarily get access to these things, all the time. Um, but now we kind of do. And I feel like what you're talking about with, people kind of become desensitized to seeing such violence against just people in general. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 100%. Earlier, you were talking about how language shapes our engagement with the material world,
Yeah,
right? And since you were talking again so much about, the Red Scare, communism, and all that stuff, I mean, this is also a great segue into my next point, right? And it becomes useful to return to language, particularly the language of commodification and extraction, because extraction was one of the defining logics of colonial economies, right?
right.
Colonial empires extracted labor, land, minerals, and wealth from colonized territories, transforming distant landscapes and populations into resources for imperial centers. But today's digital platforms operate through a different, though intriguingly similar, form of extraction. Instead of land or minerals, they extract data, attention, and emotional responses from users, right?
Yeah.
That image of that girl in Vietnam, right? Or when we think about the starving child that South African photographer took, I think it was in Sudan. They're on the ground with their face down, their belly is swollen. And I think that photographer ended up committing suicide eventually because there was nothing he could do to help that child at the time. He won like the Pulitzer Prize. There's a great movie about it actually called The Bang Bang Club. I highly
Okay.
recommend it if you haven't seen it. So, as I was saying, instead of land or minerals, they extract data, attention, and emotional responses from these users. Images of suffering become a kind of raw material within the system. The more shocking the image, the more engagement it generates. The more engagement it generates, the more revenue the platform can produce through advertising and data collection. Yet people whose lives appear in these images rarely benefit from the circulation. Their
Mm.
suffering becomes part of the raw material that fuels a global attention economy. In that sense, the algorithmic feed begins to resemble earlier colonial visual economies. The spectacle of distant suffering becomes something that audiences in relatively stable environments consume as a part of everyday digital life. And that begs the question, when suffering becomes one of the most shareable forms of content online, do you think that changes the ethical responsibility of the viewer, us?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question. And I think that, yeah, I think it requires us to be more informed. Because I think, I mean, we're all pretty familiar with seeing a terrible image on your screen of something really like horrific or sad, and you get the ignorant comment that's like, LOL, or says something really stupid or rude or trolly or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And or people fighting in the comments about, what it may or may not be invoking. I feel like
Mm,
especially um like for example, like images of what was coming out of Gaza, some of the or even I would say the protests of it here in the States of like students doing camps and stuff on campuses, and then
mm,
people commenting like incredibly ignorant things, even if they weren't a Zionist, calling these people terrorists, calling them, saying that they're like traitors to the government or whatever, which I don't really know, like what. Um, or like in the images of people in Gaza, saying like just terrible things, or just like not caring. I feel like,
mm, mm,
I think especially with the way that Americans perceive Muslim people, um, a lot of Americans view Muslim people as like a one-dimensional group who, like a monolith, basically. Like they can only ever be this way that I perceive them because this is what
mm,
I've been
mm,
taught.
mm, mm,
It's especially invokes like a lot of people will like like for example, this is a more real life example, but I went to a club meeting for this club one time, and this Muslim girl was talking about her experience. Like she was driving somewhere, and this guy rolled down his window and just started calling her a terrorist and like yelling at her. And she's like, he's like saying like fuck you, like you're a terrorist, and she's just like what the fuck is happening right now? And it's just like this insane person, but like that's like how people act on social media, or like
Yeah.
online,
Mm, mm,
like it's kind of rare that you'll see somebody like out in the wild do that. It's a lot more likely that you'll see somebody in a comment section of just some random person who is
mm,
like
mm, mm, mm.
and just saying, just spouting off shit like that. That's insane and just incredibly like rude. Um,
And
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
no, you go ahead. No, no, no.
And I think you made a good point. There is a lot of the engagement online, especially under comment sections, are so divisive, and not only amongst people on either side of the political spectrum, but even amongst like leftist circles recently, right? And it's everybody has their own opinions, influenced by their immediate environments, their experiences, and I think I want everybody to understand at the moment that what I'm doing here, like as Marxist, of course, we have a huge issue with identity politics, and I'm not trying to have this devolve into a discussion about identity politics, but all I'm trying to do here is encourage almost a form of like radical self-critique,
Yeah,
when it comes to our engagement about these things, right? And when I ask you questions like when suffering becomes one of the most shareable forms of content online, do you think that changes the ethical responsibility of the viewer? There's no right or wrong answer here, right? I, what I'm trying to do here is that even when you ask a question like this, or when you think about it, another troubling dynamic emerges from this system because even people living through the violence increasingly feel compelled to document their own suffering,
mm,
right? And in many contemporary conflicts, individuals use smartphones to record bombings, destroyed homes, or injured civilians in the hope that these images will reach a global audience, right? Particularly those in the West. Documentation can certainly be politically powerful. It can counter denial, provide evidence, and force distant observers such as ourselves to confront realities that might otherwise remain hidden. But it also creates this difficult paradox. If suffering is not documented, it risks being ignored. But if it is documented, it risks becoming another piece of viral content circulating through the algorithmic feed. There's a historian, Saidiya Hartman. They reflect on related dilemmas. I believe their book is called Scenes of Subjection, written in the 90s, late 90s, where they examine how historical narratives of slavery often rely on graphic descriptions of violence. She asks a difficult question here. When we recount scenes of suffering online, right, are we honoring the victims or are we inadvertently reproducing the spectacle of their pain? This question remains deeply relevant today with everything that's going on because, as we have seen, the line between witnessing and voyeurism can be surprisingly thin, as we're discussing right now, right? Do you have something to
yeah.
add?
Yeah, no, it reminds me actually of a moment when I was a teenager in high school at like the height, not, I don't think of the height
Mm,
of Black Lives Matter, but it was like maybe, I don't even remember when it happened in the timeline of Black Lives Matter, but there was a black man who was murdered for like a traffic stop. Like four
mm,
cops killed him. It was
mm,
like, and what made the case unique, I guess, to some, to like liberals who don't understand like class dynamics, is that people were like, oh, it was four black cops who killed him, and it's like they're still cops. Like that
mm,
doesn't, like that doesn't really change the fact that they're still cops, and they still, like if you're gonna join an institution like the police or like the fire, like the fireman or whatever it is, it's like either you accept what the institution is, and like and what it does, and you join it and you assimilate into it, or you reject it and you leave. But there's no changing it from
mm,
within. It is built on its base is white supremacy and the white
mm,
supremacist
100%.
structure.
Mm,
And so when this happened, and there was a whole video, like you can see he was
mm,
getting like the shit beat out of him, and
mm,
then
mm,
they killed
mm,
him. And
mm,
my mom came over to me and she was like, "You are not going to watch that video."
mm,
She said, "It's terrible. I forbid you from watching it." I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And she's like, you don't, she was like, "We're not going to," I think she said this almost word for word, "You're not going to reproduce the pain of like black pain, just to watch a video that you know what happened."
that's profound.
And that really made an impact on me because it made me realize just how serious the situation was, and it made me realize like um how police brutality, I mean, it's not that I didn't know beforehand with the murder of George Floyd, but it's like we all saw the video of what happened to
Mm,
George Floyd. We all
mm,
saw it.
mm,
But did any
mm,
systematic change happen by viewing that video? Did that
mm,
did any actual systematic change happen by millions of people witnessing that video? I mean, people got on the streets, but the movement was quickly co-opted by liberals because it was not it did not have the consciousness to be able to reject liberalism um as like the answer to the problem at hand,
mm, 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 mm.
unfortunately.
100%. And whether it's these extrajudicial killings of like African Americans by American police, or you know, photos and images and visceral content of the suffering taking place in war zones like Gaza, right? I think this just brings us to a deeper ethical question. If the circulation of suffering on social media reproduces elements of the older colonial visual economies that we were talking about at the beginning, then the challenge we face today is not simply technological. It is ethical and political, right? How do we witness suffering without turning it into a spectacle, as your mom was saying, right? How do we remain attentive to injustice without allowing atrocity to become just another form of content within the endless scroll, right? And perhaps most importantly, what forms of political engagement are possible for those who encounter these images from a distance? These questions lead us directly into a much older debate within post colonial theory about voice, representation, and political responsibility. Because once we recognize that seeing is structured by power, that visibility itself is unevenly distributed, the question becomes unavoidable. Who has the authority to speak about suffering, and under what conditions should those who occupy positions of relative privilege, such as ourselves, speak about struggles occurring elsewhere? Or does ethical engagement require stepping back and allowing others to represent themselves? These questions bring us directly to the work of Gayatri Spivak, whose famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, offers one of the most challenging and provocative responses to this dilemma. Because as Spivak argues, the problem of representation cannot simply be solved through science, as through silence, excuse me, as somebody as postmodernist theorists like Foucault would suggest, who explains that power is diffuse, power is everywhere, that everybody has agency, which I'm not denying people their agency, but where Foucault, what he fails to see is that in many cases silence and stepping back as Western academics does not dismantle power, it merely hides it. And this is why Spivak is really important here. Because up to this point, we've been talking about how social media platforms can reproduce something that looks remarkably similar to older colonial visual economies, systems in which bodies and pain circulate globally as images, often stripped of historical and political contents, generating enormous amounts of attention and emotional responses while rarely altering, as you said, the structural conditions that produce the violence in the first place. And once we recognize that dynamic, a question immediately begins to present itself upon us. perhaps a slightly uncomfortable one. What does ethical political engagement actually look like in an environment like this? Especially for people who are geographically distant from these conflicts, who are encountering them primarily through mediated images, and who occupy positions, whether economic, geographic, or institutional, within the global north. When you encounter images of suffering from distant places in your own feed, do you feel that they generate a sense of political responsibility from your end, or do they sometimes produce the opposite effect, something closer to paralysis, where the problem feels so large and distant that it's difficult to imagine what an ethical response would even look like?
Yeah, no, I think that I think it's a little bit of both, honestly. I feel like it fuels me with this feeling of like things need to change, we need to do something about this, and I feel like a lot of rage at the fact of what is happening or what I'm seeing. But it also does invoke a feeling of paralysis because it's like this is such a huge issue. I mean, like it's like when people say, "Oh, this is Netanyahu's war." No, it's not. He's part of it, but this is a larger that what is happening in Gaza, this genocide, is the unfortunate, incredibly unfortunate byproduct of what happens when you colonize someplace. This is no diff. This, I mean, it is a little bit different with the weaponry that's being used and the way that it's being
Mm,
carried
mm,
out.
mm.
But what do we think that Native people went through in America when Europeans came over and like pillaged their homelands, and their tribes and their everything. Hello, Zuko. It's one of those things that it really makes you realize like this is not a new problem. This has been happening for a while. And it's being perpetuated by the same powers that existed back then as well,
Mm,
just in a different way. They just had, they had different access. They had access to different resources, and it was a different situation, but
mm, mm.
the fundamental structures remain the same. And so
100%.
I think, but I also want to counter something that you said with this
Sure.
concept of ethical. Is
Mm.
there really any ethical consumption under capitalism? Is there really, are we, what when we're talking about ethical and like the ethical, like consuming of these images or of things or of resources under the current mode of production, what can we categorize as ethical versus not?
That's a really interesting question, especially when we think about it within the context of consumerism, right? Consumerism itself within the global political economy. No, under capitalism, I mean, one could argue that it is never ethical, right? But when we engage in the radical self-critique that I'm talking about, right? I guess the goal is to get as close as we can to what we might describe as ethical under the current system that we find ourselves in,
Right.
right? And you were mentioning like a good point when you were talking about Netanyahu, right? As he's like people point to him as the problem, as the issue, but it's part of a much bigger thing. And once again, if we go back to like people like Foucault here, Marx locates power in the economic base, the economic superstructure, right? Whereas Foucault denies that completely, and he locates power in knowledge production, discourse, right? And he's really good at pointing to the symptoms rather than the structure itself, right? I think he's useful in many ways,
Oh
but
yeah.
this is where,
This is where he
people,
starts to not, he's
yeah,
missing the secret sauce. He's missing the
exactly.
secret sauce. Like it's
The sauce, yeah.
he's lost in the sauce, if you will. Yeah. No, I think that's such a good point
Mm.
actually.
And
Because yeah.
yeah, sorry. I think that um, many contemporary decolonial Marxist conversations, right? I think one of the responses that frequently appear, okay, is the suggestion that people who occupy relatively privileged positions, whether that be racial, geographic, or institutional, should simply step back and remain quiet when it comes to struggles taking place elsewhere, right? The reasoning behind this position is understandable and in many ways ethically motivated because it emerges from a very real historical pattern in which Western intellectuals, NGOs, journalists, and governments repeatedly spoke over colonized populations while claiming, often quite sincerely, to speak for them or on their behalf. And in that context, the impulse to withdraw politically, to say, let people speak for themselves, do not represent others, do not reproduce colonial patterns of authority, as Foucault would argue, can appear as a kind of corrective gesture. But that, but but the Marxist post-colonial theorist, Spivak, complicates this position in a very profound way in her famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Because she argues that silence or political withdrawal does not actually allow us to escape the problem of power at all. In many cases, it simply makes that power harder to see. So Spivak's most famous claim, the subaltern cannot speak, is one of the most widely quoted and I also think widely misunderstood lines in post-colonial theory. What she is not saying is that marginalized people are incapable of speech, incapable of agency, or somehow lacking in consciousness. That would be obviously absurd,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What she is describing instead is a structural problem of recognition, one that has to do with the institutions that determine what counts as legitimate knowledge in the contemporary world. When subaltern people speak, their speech very often fails to register as knowledge within the institutional spaces that organize global discourse today. Think, for example, about the institutions that decide whose voices circulate internationally. Those are universities, courts, archives, NGOs, major media organizations. These institutions establish the rules of intelligibility. They
Mm.
decide what counts as credible testimony, what counts as evidence, and what counts as expertise. And if someone's speech does not conform to those frameworks, if it doesn't appear in the right language, the right format, the right institutional setting, it effectively disappears. Not because the person is silent, but because their speech does not travel through the circuits where recognition happens. And I'm curious how you see this playing out today, because social media often presents itself as a democratizing technology. But do you think that these platforms generally change who can be heard, or do they mainly reproduce older structures of visibility in slightly different forms?
Yeah, no, so two things with that actually. So first, I
Mm,
would say social media, maybe at its inception and what the internet was to begin with, most certainly was,
mm,
I think I think that if you strip down everything that the internet has become and you look at what it started as, and um I guess what it started to grow into, um especially, I mean, to ground this, I mean, think about like the stuff with Section 230 and trying to like, change things with Section 230 and make like social media platforms,
mm,
I
mm,
guess, responsible for what people say. I think this is a really interesting conversation. Taylor Lorenz has like a whole video on this situation, and I think it's pretty good. Um, but I think that under the current mode of production and the way that we produce consumer goods and the way that we produce
mm,
commodities,
mm,
social media as it exists currently under this mode of production can only produce a commodified form of media. Where
mm, mm,
I think that how it currently exists in the internet, with, for example, advertising, targeted
mm,
advertising, it is to get you to buy more stuff. It is to get you, like, I remember I was getting this ad all the freaking time and it was the worst. But it was also kind of enticing. That's the problem. It was this little duck or goose thing, this little lamp that was like, it was like,
mm.
do you want this depressed goose lamp that lays on its side and, it's like having an existential crisis? And I'm like, this is too targeted. This is a little too targeted for me. Because,
Dude, the ads are reading my mind. It's
yes,
insane. It's
yes,
insane.
yes, yes. No, and have you heard of the cases where Facebook has accurately predicted when a woman is pregnant?
No.
Yes, this is a real thing. You should look it up after this. Like, this is an actual thing that has happened. or it's kind of crazy because they're taking in all of this data of you, of everything about you,
Yeah.
of your entire
Mm, mm,
profile, of everything.
mm,
And so like a
mm.
Google search, like for example, why am I vomiting in the morning? And then the next thing you know, you're getting an ad for pregnancy like gummies.
Mm, mm, mm.
Like things like that, where it can track everything that you're doing and predict things about you.
We are the
Um,
product.
we are the product. And
Yes.
I think what I also think about in academia, and this is I gotta put on my Soviet Union cap there here for a second. I'm gonna be a Stalinista for a second. Do you know
Please
of
so.
Grover Furr, the academic Grover
Grover
Furr?
fur.
Yes.
No.
Okay. So he is a professor of medieval literature, but he has also done extensive research on the Soviet Union. As he is he specifically has researched the Stalin era, and the
Mm,
entire Stalin era. He speaks Russian. He has been through the archives. He's been studying the Stalin era for about 50 years now. He's written many books on it. And he brought up in one of our discussions that we've had, it's recorded on this channel, it's the third episode, and he discusses this thing called like this, I think it's the Stalin paradigm, where
mm,
in academia you can never actually say, especially specifically in Soviet studies and the in Russian history, you can never accurately portray who Joseph Stalin actually was. You can only use the caricature of what Western academics have molded him into as like a ruthless Polish baby eating dictator, basically. Like basically like like pushing up, for example, of the Holodomor, which was not
mm,
an
mm,
actual thing. Like, yes, there was mass starvation. I will always toe this line of yes, there was like there was starvation on like a mass level across the Soviet Union, and this is because there was a famine happening. And it was due to like natural causes because this place in the world is just really bad for farming.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
but also because of bad Soviet policy. But there was never a policy.
Collectivization, right?
Yeah, collectivization
Mm,
was amazing in a lot of ways, but it was poorly done in other ways. I mean, we have to be frank about this and realize what happened
mm,
and that people suffered and people died, and
mm,
it was not
mm,
pretty.
mm,
But there was never a policy of genocide against the Ukrainian
mm, mm,
people. There was never
mm,
a policy
mm,
of genocide.
mm.
And the Bolsheviks and the Soviet government took responsibility for the famine, which is unheard of in governments.
Of course, of course. It's like Mao's Great Leap Forward,
Yeah,
right? Today, the Chinese Communist Party take full responsibility for that, and I think as Marxists, we have to kind of critique earlier or failed socialist projects and just learn from them,
yeah.
right?
And
Mm,
what Grover Furr was talking about is the fact that
mm,
in Soviet studies and in anything related to Soviet history, you can never actually be honest about who Stalin was as a person, his flaws and his good stuff. The good stuff that he
mm,
did, the fact that he was an anti-fascist, he was not an
mm,
anti-Semite. He was actually incredibly base. Like he he's like huge in communist
mm, mm,
theory,
mm,
and but you can never actually say that. You will never be
mm.
accepted into academia. You will be pushed out, and you will never get things like
You'd
tenure.
be crucified
You will be
for sure, for
crucified.
sure.
And it's
Mm,
the
mm,
same, I feel, with like Black academics as well,
mm,
who study radical Black history. A lot of them, in order to be accepted into academia, you have to be effectively defanged. You can't be a radical.
yeah,
You
of
can't be
course.
someone who believes in radical ideas because you are a danger to the system itself. If you
Hmm.
begin to put out these actual, like these real questions, for
Mm.
example, if we start to reckon with the fact that Stalin was not a dictator, then we have to reckon with the story that we're fed about who really won World War II. Who were
Mm.
the real anti-fascists? It wasn't
The
America.
Americans.
it wasn't it wasn't the American government. They were not anti-fascist. It was the Soviet Union. Like
100%.
but
100%.
if we accept that reality, then we have to accept the
Mm.
reality that our government is actually adjacent to the Nazis. not
They
opposites.
co-opted Nazism, just dropped the aesthetics and the goose stepping because the optics were bad,
Yes.
right? But that's not the history they tell you.
No,
It's
it's not.
insane. It's
It is.
insane.
And it's the fact is that Stalin and Stalin's leadership and Stalin's government, and it wasn't just him, he was the
Mm,
captain of a team. He was not a dictator. He was the captain of a team and he helped people, and I'm going on my soapbox about Stalin because that's my goat.
it's okay.
But like it's important to me. It's important to me because people don't realize how much of a
Mm,
contribution he made to society at large. We would all be speaking German if it wasn't for
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Soviet Union, you
And
know,
arguably any U.S. president after Stalin is objectively worse
and before.
human
All of
beings.
them were
Yeah,
worse than
yeah, of
Stalin.
course, of course, of
All of
course.
them. I told my dad, I had an argument with my dad one time, and I said, if Stalin was a dictator, then George W. Bush is Hitler.
Yeah. Well, look how we talk about characters such as like Henry Kissinger, right?
Thank you. Like,
Right? We prop him up as like one of the greatest. Oh my God.
no, but this is also
Ugh.
interesting because my aunt, I'm going to bring my whole family into this. My aunt, I remember accidentally sending her a Snapchat one time, a picture of me with
Mm.
a picture of me going, Kissinger's dead, LMAO. And she was like, how could you say that? He escaped the Holocaust. And I was like, he killed like a million Cambodians. What are you talking
Yeah, yeah,
about?
yeah.
Like, okay, and I think this is an interesting segue into a conversation around like how violence is reproduced, and that nobody is unable to reproduce immense amounts of violence.
Mm, mm, mm,
I think that there's this, especially with Zionism, there is this concept.
mm, mm,
I feel like it's a little bit unspoken, where it's like Jews cannot do violence because violence has been done to Jews. But that's
mm,
not true.
mm,
There are other historical like victims of like, scapegoating and
mm,
and
mm,
and, and genocide, you know.
mm,
And many anti-Zionist Jews will make this point, who will talk about this, where it's like there is this victim complex within
mm.
Zionists of like we can only ever be victims. Anything that we do to others is self-defense or
It's a really
is
strange pathology.
it
Yeah.
is. It's incredibly strange.
Mm,
And
mm,
Zionism isn't the only one either. I feel like
mm.
Americans really had this mentality after 9/11 of we have been incredibly victimized, therefore anything that we do to anybody else after this is completely justified. Where when you put 9/11 in context, I mean, this is the one time I'm going to say Hassan Piker was right. America deserved 9/11. You know, I'm not going to cry a tear over the fact that the Pentagon was like
Can I
destroyed.
ask you something?
Yeah.
Can you just say something like that on like it's like
He
I'm
got
not
banned.
disagreeing with you.
He got banned
Yeah,
for
yeah.
saying
Yeah,
that.
his son Piker got banned from Twitch, and this is just the political environment that exists in the US today. So, I'm not disagreeing with you in what you said, but do you feel comfortable saying something like that and still, on your platform here?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I've said worse.
Cool.
I've said like
Okay, awesome.
I
All
have
right.
said no. You say
Fuck
whatever
yeah.
you want. Like, and that's the thing is when you look at the context of what America has done to so many other countries,
Mm, mm,
and you
mm,
realize like with the shit that we did to Afghanistan
mm, mm,
and to Iraq and the fact that we prop up. I just did an episode yesterday with Will's Talks where we talked about the UAE and the fact that we prop up so many Gulf monarchies that literally exist because of slavery. And the fact that we
mm,
prop
mm,
them up, we allow them to exist. And then we act
100%.
surprised when the people who are subject to that immense violence retaliate.
Mm, mm.
9/11 did not happen in a vacuum. These things did not just happen because people are evil. They happen because of people's material conditions and the fact that they are responding to an environment of incredible violence. So
Yeah,
we
and
can't be surprised.
I think definitely the genocide in Gaza has led to many people being able to break these chains of indoctrination, right? I don't know if you remember a year or two ago, Osama bin Laden's note to the US after 9/11 was beginning to circulate online
I did
again,
not see
unlike,
this.
yeah, and people were reading it. And one of the points he made is, of course, the absolute devastation and the scale of human loss caused by US imperialism. And he specifically highlights the Palestinian people and what they've been going through, right?
Yep.
And he says this is not necessarily an attack on the average US citizen, but a response to it. Immediately after that happened, a politician from the US is like, "Oh, TikTok is like enemy number one. We
Yeah.
gotta," it
Yep.
it's insane because given the context of everything going on today, I think people are beginning to realize. And you made an interesting point about the victim mentality that exists in the US today because of 9/11. I didn't realize it was still such a big thing. Like they still have that victim mentality in the same way, Israelis do. Um,
Yep. And
man, it.
I think it's partly because
Mm,
Americans have never experienced such incredible violence at such a rapid rate as when it happened
mm,
on 9/11. Everything that
mm,
we like when you think about who came out on top in World War II again, it was America only just by virtue of the fact that we have two oceans surrounding us.
mm, mm,
So it's
mm,
really
mm,
hard to get here and do war
mm,
on this continent.
mm,
Unless we went to war with Canada or Mexico, which I mean we
mm.
wouldn't, but if we did, like that would, I mean maybe, but like everything that happened in the European theater, in the Pacific theater, especially when you think about the mass loss that happened in the Soviet Union of like what 27 million people,
Yeah, yeah. And
like
often what's not talked about is the Pacific theater as well. When you hear about it, you hear about America's role in like Japan, but not what the Chinese had to deal with
mhm,
and
yeah,
what the Imperial Army did to them and the rape of Nanking. And oh my God, you're never taught about that,
or
right? It's
the My Lai massacre in Vietnam.
100%.
I mean,
That too, yeah.
or the genocide in Cambodia in which we were funding
Mm,
the Khmer Rouge,
mm, 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 mm.
and China unfortunately was also in
Yeah.
bed with Kissinger and Nixon, which is
Yes.
huge L.
Mm,
And it's one of those things that you have to think about how violence can be reproduced. And when I talk about Kissinger and that my aunt tried to use the fact that he escaped the Holocaust, it's like, yeah. And then he went on to have a career of mass murder on the
mm,
political
mm,
scale.
mm,
That does not, I don't, here's the thing. It reminds me, and this author kind of sucks now, but it does remind me of, the comic book Mouse about the Holocaust and
yeah,
like,
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
well, there's
That was banned in the US, I heard. I heard
yes,
it's now banned. Yeah, yeah, crazy.
yeah, yeah, crazy. And there's a scene in that book, I believe.
Mm,
I haven't read it, but I know of this scene where basically there's like this like it's like years after the Holocaust happened, and it's like, a Holocaust survivor and his son, and
mm,
they see like a black person walking down the street, and the Holocaust
sure.
survivor says something like really bigoted.
Mm,
And his son is like, how could you say that? Like, how could you? And then he's like, you survived the Holocaust, like, how could you say something like that? And
mm,
the book, like that interaction invoked of a realization in me when I heard about this passage, which was like, just because someone has been through immense pain and trauma through
mm,
like imperial violence or just violence in general doesn't
mm,
necessarily make them someone who is immune from being able to do that to someone else. And it doesn't
mm,
make them immune from reproducing it
mm,
or internalizing it,
mm.
and it's recognized.
I actually think it's the opposite. People who have faced violence on a large scale, whether it be like physical, direct violence or psychological violence or cultural violence, whatever it may be, end up reproducing those patterns of violence a lot more easily. And here's kind of like a little bit of like an anecdotal experience. In 2020, I lived in Poland for 7 years. 7 years, 7 months. Oh
20,
God,
2020 was
7 years.
7 years long. Don't say that.
Yeah, so it was 7 months, and when I got there, COVID happened like immediately, which sucked. But
Mm.
being from Canada, I did experience, you know, racism to a certain extent, but like these microaggressions, being pulled over for like whatever reason you were speeding, but really it was because I was brown, whatever it might
Right.
be.
Right.
But the explicit racism that I faced in Poland, it was the first time I realized that my skin color bothered people. I had an experience when I first got there the first month. We were at a karaoke bar with other Erasmus Plus students, exchange students, and I was in the bathroom and this huge, nothing scarier than a drunk Polish man. And
Yeah.
anyways, he started talking to me in Polish, and I'm like, "Excuse me." He asked me where I'm from, and I had a big beard at that time, big
Yeah.
black beard. And I said, "Hey, man, I'm from Canada, but I'm living in Sweden right now." And I was wearing my mom's cross that she gave me before she passed away when I was younger. So I'm
Yeah.
not a particularly religious person, but I would wear it all the time. And
Right.
he looks at me, he's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, I answer the question, and then he looks at me, he's like, "You fucking Muslims," and I'm like, "Oh well, I'm Christian," and he just and like horks right on my chest, and
Oh,
I was like, at that moment, I realized it didn't matter that I spoke, you know, an American dialect of English, you can say. It didn't matter that I was Christian. It was just how I looked to this person, right? And at the same time, I mean, one day I was walking, I got backhanded asking somebody for a lighter to light my cigarette, and he was like, "Kurva this, kurva that." I could only assume it was because of how I looked and my skin color. And I was concussed when that happened. I remember I went home and I called my old man and I was in tears because I mean, that was a huge wake up call to me. But at the same time, I did take a lot of classes in, you know, Polish history. You had the Third Reich and then the Eastern Bloc. And obviously, what these people went through sucked. Okay. And I tried to intellectualize it and I tried to understand. But at the same time, it's hard to excuse that kind of behavior. Of course, I didn't go through what the Polish people went through World War II and then post World War II, but it is insane the victim mentality they have. And if you look at their Independence Day marches now, it's just become like a giant neo-Nazi meetup and get together, right in Warsaw. And the right-wing government there and neo-Nazism on the rise, it's insane. And they all
incredibly.
do the same thing. They use their experiences from the past, this victim mentality, to justify how they perpetuate violence onto other people,
Yeah.
right? Just
Yeah.
an interesting experience altogether.
No. Yeah, no, and that's like incredibly traumatic. Like
Yeah.
that had to be like really traumatic, and I think that like something that kind of reminds me of
Mm.
just I guess time is it wrapping up here soon, but something
Sure,
that does
sure.
remind me of um is I hate when you get really into a conversation, you're like, oh, I have to go, but no, I don't want to. Like, this is so interesting. um I think it reminds me of, I saw a TikTok or a reel or something, and it was, I
Mm,
don't remember. I just know it was a video, and it was this guy in like a military uniform. It looked like he
sure.
was in the Air Force. And he's like, I don't want, he was like, I don't want to go to Iran, and it's not. And he said it like that, Iran, like Tim Walz,
Iran.
Iran, like he said it like that,
Iran.
and he's like, it's not because, I don't want to, go fight for my country and everything. He's like, it's because it's hard to control myself around caramel colored
The
women.
caramel skinned. Well, I seen this video, and then he came
You've
out
seen
later and he was
it.
like, "Oh, he was just like, it was just a joke." It doesn't matter, man. It was
That doesn't
fucking
matter.
disgusting.
And it reminds me, and I made a point last episode on my
Mm,
podcast or my radio show, whatever the hell you want to call
mm,
it
mm,
these days. Um, it I said we need to pay attention to signs of femicide in Iran,
mm, mm,
especially
mm, mm.
after the bombing of the girls' school, where 160 schoolgirls were murdered by the American government using
Oh,
a
for fuck's
Tomahawk
sakes.
missile. And that, I feel, I talked to some comrades in my party, and we're like, we need to pay attention to how women are treated by the West, America and Israel, in this conflict and in this war, because
Mm,
I
mm, mm.
feel, this whole, the pink washing of this this war and like the use of women's rights and reinstating women's rights in
mm,
Iran as if
mm,
they were
mm.
there to begin with under the Shah. Trying to moralize this in some way and say like we're actually fighting for something great, guys. Trust us. But I feel like the opposite is going to happen at the hands of the American military. If we do a ground invasion, if American or Israeli troops or both hit the borders of Iran and try to invade Iran, or even not,
You guys are cooked. Yeah.
we're absolutely yes, absolutely. But we need to pay attention to how the institutions for women and girls
Mm,
are treated, how women and girls on the street are treated,
mm,
how
mm, mm,
women and girls in prison are treated,
mm, 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 mm,
um, because and especially how trans women. I don't know of the trans population in Iran, but of course, trans women are also like in a different way
mm, mm,
victimized by imperial forces.
mm,
But we need to pay attention to how women are being treated because that
mm,
video to me signified and something basically saying um, once again the way colonial powers view women of color as sexual objects uh, to be owned and
exoticized,
to
right?
be exoticized. Here's the
Mm,
thing, and I don't want to center my own experience. This is just an anecdotal thing that happened to me. I'm half Puerto Rican.
mm,
It doesn't look like that. I don't look like that. I look very, very white. But I am. And in high school, I told this guy that I was friends with that I am.
mm.
He was like, "Oh, I've never slept with a Latina girl before." And
Whoa.
I was like,
Yeah.
"That's really weird. Why would you say that
Mm,
to me?"
mm, 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 mm,
I don't even really identify as Latina because I was not raised in the culture. I mean, I was kind of, but it's a little complicated. And I feel weird about using the identity because I just don't feel like I fit into it very well. But like it was so strange because I was like, what the fuck? We're friends. I don't want to sleep with you. Like, that's weird. Um,
You reminded me of something hilarious.
no,
Sorry, 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 sorry.
no,
Continue,
no, no.
continue.
Um, but it's like that's like the way that like women of color are treated, where
Mm,
it's
mm,
like
mm,
you are now an exotic like thing to be conquered, and like you're like someone's conquest, and like now it's like it's
mm.
especially like the way that like black women are heavily sexualized, but
Like
also
Pocahontas shit, you know?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
Now say what now
Exactly.
say what it reminded you of. I'm curious.
So I go to Egypt every year. I've been going for the last 6 years. I actually did my master's thesis there.
Okay,
Um, but I have this friend. I'm going to keep them anonymous, of course.
right.
Um, So I researched the underground music scene, the rave scene in Egypt for
Oh,
3 months
period.
in Cairo. So I met a lot of people. A lot of them are very progressive and open-minded, despite the fact that it's a very conservative country. And you have a
Right,
lot of Europeans that go to engage in that nightlife, right?
right.
And a lot of these white guys, she told me about an experience. She's dark-skinned, clearly Egyptian, curly hair. And she said, I was seeing this guy that really wanted to hook up with me. And he looked at me and he's like, "Oh, you're like my Cleopatra, you know?" And it's like, you idiot. Cleopatra was Greek, first of all. You know? But yeah, I mean, she's like, I felt so exoticized at that moment and gross. And he's like, "Oh, your caramel skin and your curly hair." Like, and
Oh,
it's, yeah, nasty and disgusting, right?
so
But
weird.
Cleopatra.
No, and like that's like the type of shit that it's like, come on, man. Like
Mm,
it's just gross and it's weird and it's especially like once again, like I feel like this is especially prevalent in like American
mm,
culture, the way that like white dudes, like wasps, like the way that they view like any woman that looks remotely exotic. Like bunny,
mm,
like for those who aren't like looking like bunny ears exotic, like quote unquote
mm,
exotic,
mm, mm,
like the concept of like any woman that like is like, for example, like looks a little bit ethnic, is like,
mm,
ooh, it's
mm,
like, ooh, where are you from? And it's like, or it's like, I know like my partner's sister, they're Italian, like that, like
mm,
they're very Italian. Like they're all Sicilian, but
mm,
she
mm.
kind of looks a little Lebanese, actually. Like
Okay.
she looks a little like she looks she kind of looks like she could not like she could kind of be from the region of like West
Mm,
Asia. And so
mhm,
she's gotten people coming up to her who are like so there was like a group of girls at one of her because she used to do like coffee shop like she like did like a coffee shop tour because she's a singer, and this group of girls came up to her who I believe were like a mixture of like Arab women and like just West Asian, and they were like, are you Arab or are you like we love your look, and she's like, no, I'm Italian, like I'm Sicilian, but it's like people just like people especially because we're also one of like this like the zoomers, the Gen Z,
mm,
like we're
mm,
one
mm,
of the most like integrated and like ethnically like mixed, I'm forgetting
mm,
the word, like generations ever.
mm,
Like
mm,
you
mm,
have like just like more than ever people are like dating other people who aren't within like their one group.
mm, mm,
It's
mm,
interesting, and now you have like an entire generation of people who are like not just white or just Italian or just Irish,
mm.
or like you have like a whole mix of
A
people.
diverse ethnic
Yeah,
makeup.
a
Yeah, yeah.
diverse, and so it's kind of interesting to like see
Mm.
how like those distinct markers don't necessarily exist as distinctly as they used to, I feel.
Yeah. Mm, mm. And you bring up an interesting point. As somebody who's Lebanese and Syrian,
Yeah,
okay, it would be some Lebanese people's dream to be. Okay, so when we're looking at the Iranian diaspora today and
yeah,
their kind of desire to share like a some sort of proximity or imagined proximity to whiteness,
yeah.
right? As somebody who comes from a Christian Lebanese background, I grew up being told at home that we were white people. We were Caucasian. We weren't Arab. And like when 9/11 happened, okay, so I come from a pretty conservative family. They were constituents to the Phalangist Party during the Civil War, the literal
Mhm.
fascists, right?
Yeah.
And when 9/11 happened, anyways, yeah, my parents were very Islamophobic at the and yeah. And
Yeah.
anyways, they told me,
Yeah.
okay, now go to school and tell everybody that their prophet did this and that their prophet was like a rapist or whatever and that the Arabs did this. So like I went around telling people, "Oh, the Arabs are terrorists," and like thinking I was
Oh
white,
no. Oh
right? And
no.
then I saw this Christian Lebanese stand-up comedian explain this perfectly the other day. Like, have you seen The Sixth Sense with like Bruce Willis?
Yeah. Yeah.
I see dead people because he's
Yeah.
trying to figure out who these dead people are. And then at the end of the movie, he's like, "Oh shit, I'm the dead one." Eventually, I'm just like, "Oh my God, I'm the Arab."
That's me.
And it's so funny because because Christian Lebanese, I'm telling you, there's nobody more racist than us. We think we're white. Nous parlez le français aussi. Oh, kifak, ça va bien. Like it's so gross how bad we want to be white, and so many of them reminisce of the colonial era when the French, you know, um, um, I mean, under French rule and stuff, and when I hear some of these Iranians speak, especially the monarchists, I relate to that so hard. And it's not. Uh, it is a mind fuck to say the
Yes,
least.
I bet it is.
You know.
And that's oh, sorry to interrupt. Do you want to finish your thought?
No, no, no.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I'm going with this at this point. But
No, but
it's
I feel you, and
yeah.
I feel like especially like race in the way that we
Mm,
understand it and the way that it's been
mm,
conceptualized, like in the last
mm,
episode I recorded yesterday with Will's Talks once
mm,
again. I
mm,
talked about like Bacon's Rebellion and how like how race and like the way we view race now was like conceptualized,
mm,
and
mm,
and
mm.
and the fact that race nowadays I feel like is more related to your proximity to whiteness than it is necessarily your race itself. Um,
Yes, yes, yes. Like a cultural proximity sometimes as
yeah.
well.
It's,
You
I think,
know.
a cultural proximity, but it's also how you look.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, for example, there are Mexican women who look
mm,
Irish, who look completely Irish, like the most Irish you could look. And they speak
mm,
perfect Spanish. They are from Mexico. They identify as Mexican, but
mm,
they're
mm.
not like part of like the indigenous group who was from that region before it
No
became
descendants
Mexico.
of, yeah,
Yeah, the
yes, yes.
descendants of like the tribes that lived there.
Mm,
But
mm,
they still identify as Mexican,
mm,
and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I don't think it is. Like, it's just how
mm.
it's like also their cultural identity and the fact that they were raised in this culture. But I think that the way that we as Marxists especially need to, and Marxist-Leninists need to look at race and how race is, I think, used by the bourgeois class to further divide
100%.
us.
Mm,
We also need to recognize the intersectionality of our culture and of the people. And this is
mm,
not
mm,
identity
mm,
politics. Identity
mm,
politics is saying, I am Iranian, therefore you must listen to me on everything I have to say about Iran, and I am just right.
mm,
It doesn't, it's the same thing for like the Cuban diaspora, for example.
mm,
Are you going
mm,
to listen to a Miami Cuban about the realities of Fidel Castro and the
mm,
the Cuban
mm.
government after 1959? Probably not.
And it all
Prob-
comes to down to class, right? The diaspora
yeah.
communities are often the ones that had the social mobility to leave
And a
these
lot of
areas in the first place, right?
and they're like, oh, the feudalistas, they took our land and they took our,
Mm,
and it's like, and
mm,
you're
mm, mm,
slaves?
mm,
Like,
mm,
and like, it's like, come on, and it's like, it's the fact that we need to understand that, like, I hear this used a
mm,
lot as like a justification of slavery, where it's like,
mm,
oh, well, there were black people in Africa who were selling slaves to the white people. And it's like, that may be true. And we can
mm,
understand that class dynamic through a materialist lens of saying that, like, yes,
mm,
there was a class relation in which there were certain groups of people who were being
mm,
sold into slavery. But that
mm,
doesn't change or negate the fact that slavery still happened and that it was still
mm,
and its characteristics. That just
mm.
means that just adds to our argument about class dynamics and how the bourgeois class conducts itself to maintain power. This
All
is,
these movements,
yeah,
and Fred Hampton knew this very well.
yes, he
He
did. My
spoke about it
king.
brilliantly. Yeah, exactly. And whatever it might be, these environmentalist movements, especially here in Sweden and in
Yeah.
Germany, so many of them are devoid of any class analysis, right? They target just the symptom, but it's the same with, you know, uh, black suffrage, women's rights movements, right? If you don't address the economic base, right, nothing's ever going to change. And these identity politics are, of course, just a distraction at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they are. And that's the
Mm,
and it's again, it's important to recognize intersectionality
mm,
as
mm,
like your identity can inform your
mm,
perspective. But I think that the thing that informs all of us, no matter what, is our material circumstances.
mm, mm,
And where we, and the way that material and resources are
mm, mm.
distributed, and why that is. We can understand that
100%. Mm,
black communities in Chicago, for example. I do a lot of research on Chicago, and it's like segregation still exists in Chicago. If y'all didn't know, by the
mm,
way,
mm,
segregation still absolutely exists in Chicago.
mm.
Um, but that segregation is a symptom of the mode of production that of which we live under. It is used
Yes.
as a weapon.
Mm,
It
mm,
is
mm,
not, and that's why it's important to understand how all of these relate to class and economic power. But we're getting to the end of time here. Is there anything you wanted to add before we finish up?
Um, I guess I had so much to talk about, and I knew I probably wasn't going to get through all of it,
It's okay. We can
but
do another episode.
yes, I would love to. I would love to. I really enjoyed this, but
Yeah,
I guess what I'll going back to our original topic, what I will leave people with is this, like a little maybe shred of optimism. But I mean, yes, I mean, of course, if we're not careful, I think the way we engage with social media, the way we engage with these, with these politics, right? I think if we're not careful, we'll have traded our capacity for horror for the an aesthetic of endless content. We'll have traded it for numbness, for forgetting. Yet, I think within this despair, there is a glimmer of optimism. Okay.
Yeah.
A demand that we reject the algorithm's sleight of hand, its curation of cruelty into consumable bites. Because the martyrs, at the end of the day, the martyrs, the men, the women, and the children, those who insist on being seen not as pixels, but as people, their names, their stories have etched themselves into the marble of history. So maybe the solution is not to unsee, not to withdraw politically, but to unforget, if that makes sense. And if gone, to resurrect that visceral shock, to recognize that our scrolls, our feeds, our likes, they too are documents. What we choose to amplify, to mourn, to fight for becomes the archive of our humanity.
Yeah. That was very
And
profound.
yeah, thank you. I guess I'll end with that. Maybe if you'd like to do some part two later in the
Yeah.
future, that'd be great. Or just talk
Bonus.
about something completely different. I'd be cool with that as well. I said that our conversation will probably branch out into something totally unrelated, which I love,
And it
right?
did, as usual. This
It
is
did.
always how it goes.
Fantastic, fantastic. I had so much fun. I had so
Yes.
much fun.
Yes, it was wonderful having you on.
Mm-mm-mm.
For those who don't know, the Liberation Hour is ending in May, but we will be picking it right back up with the Red Phoenix News
Mm.
Network. So you are absolutely invited to collaborate with us on that. And we
I'd
can
love
always
to.
do, before the Liberation Hour ends, we can always do a bonus episode, which could be a little longer on this topic more
Mm.
specifically, with, I guess, a little more in-depth study. Because I think that would be
Sure,
really
sure.
interesting on my end as well, because I didn't get as much time to look into the
Mm.
materials as I'd like. So we can certainly schedule something like that. But yeah, leave it in the comments if you're interested in hearing more. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
Me. Oh yeah,
Yes,
you could
you.
follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. My handle is DecolonizeHummus.
Yes.
Okay, you could find me there. I upload reels consistently,
Very good
talking
reels.
about various political issues. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So much. If you're interested about the politics of Sweden, I'm currently doing a series on that. The first episode was about our eugenics program that
Ah!
took place. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you not
Yes.
seen that yet?
No.
Check it out. Check it out. It
Will
did. It
do.
did really well.
Link it
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
link in
yeah.
bio, link in bio.
Sweden sterilized 63,000 people recently. Like, and the program ended in 2013. I mean, it's crazy.
We have to do an episode.
Not a lot
I'm
of people
already,
know this. Yes, yes. Okay,
yes.
amazing. We'll do
Yes.
that.
Yes, we have to
That'd be great.
bonus episodes, eugenics in Sweden. Yes.
All right.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, absolutely. We will, yes. All of the interesting. I will link everything down in the description. Send me all your links and yeah. So thank you so much for coming.